Welcome to Keeping It Weird, episode 2.
Episode 2. I'm Melissa.
I'm Courtney.
And we're here to be weird.
Yeah.
Are you still weird?
Still weird. Tried and true. Sorry, first things first. Sorry about episode 1. Was the calibration round.
Yeah.
Didn't quite know how the cameras were going to work, how the sound was going to work, so it's a little piecemeal together. It's kind of our little Frankenstein experiment. But we make it work.
There's a learning curve here,
right,
so.
Yeah, I think we got things a little more subtle this time. Also, this is Sippy. This is my little parrot. Mm-hmm. He's a good boy. So if you hear him squawking, if you see him picking up my face, that's who that is. So it's a bit of a zoo here.
It's normal. It's regular. We're just adding to the weirdness ambiance here.
So many people from my videos have said, I totally thought that was a fake parrot. And I'm thinking, why would I just have a random fake parrot on my shoulder for a very serious video? Like, that had nothing to do with pirates.
Or parrots.
This is ridiculous. Time for our first segment. Friends and followers! This segment is when we give our recommendations of people we love, friends, followers, countrymen, favorites, whatever.
Favorite accounts, favorite people, favorite
things we think you'll like.
My first one has nothing to do with anything like neurodivergence related. This is just a podcast that I found recently that I really love. I'm not sure if it's for everyone, but if you have the same sense of humor that I do, which would be like...
Crass?
Yeah, crass. Thank you. That's perfect. Yeah, crass humor. This podcast is called The Basement Yard. People may have already heard of them because it's a really popular podcast, but it's 2 guys, and they basically just like banter. They talk about the most random things. It's just sort of like 2 guys sitting around talking, but they're both like really funny. And it's one of the only podcasts that makes me like laugh out loud every single time I listen to it. So I enjoy that when I'm just sitting there and I got my earbuds in and I'm like, and no one knows why.
I especially love that stuff when I've just had like a really hard day and I just want my brain to turn to mush. It just like make me laugh.
This is a good podcast that I put on in the background when I'm having moments where I like, because I like certain podcasts that I like really have to pay attention to and listen to, and there's like a lot of details, and a lot of the true crime podcasts are like that I listen to and stuff where I'm like, I don't want to miss anything. But this is a podcast where it's very easy to just have on in the background and still get enough of what they're saying,
right? To
where it's just like you can relax while you're listening to it and not be like, I have to hear every moment.
Yeah, so not stress on the details.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Yeah.
My first recommendation is ADHD coach Sheila. Yes, another ADHD coach, but she's a lot of fun and she is totally autism friendly. She's totally autism informed. And she's got a lot of really cool infographics on Instagram. So we originally were friends on TikTok, and then we both kind of moved to Instagram once I started Reels. And she's really like picked up the pace with these really cool infographics, and it gives you a lot of cool information and tips and tricks just, with one quick little visual. So I definitely recommend reaching out to her. She also does a group coaching session that's pretty affordable. So that's good for people who, can't afford a one-on-one ADHD coach.
Good. My second one is a TikTok account, Dylan Mulvaney. I have been following her. She's a trans woman. I've been following her since before she transitioned. And she has kind of documented her full transition journey. And she is very positive and upbeat and just always brings a smile to my face. I guess my theme today is like just things that I like to consume when I'm like, I just want to feel nice right now. I want to laugh, or I want to be happy, or I want some positivity. It
seems like there's a huge overlap of autistic people and trans. Mm-hmm. Is that a thing? Is that like something that's talked about a lot? Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah.
And I've just noticed LGBTQ friendly in general and neurodivergence in general. Like 100% of the people I know who are LGBTQ are also neurodivergent, or at least show all the symptoms,
Yeah, particularly with gender identity, there has been found to be a big link between autism and that. So that would be a good episode topic to dive into one day.
It'd be interesting to think about whether that's a social construct or a genetic one of like socially just not not holding social norms to any really sort of importance. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so my next recommendation is my new favorite artist. She's had a couple of songs go viral on social media. Quick little sweet upbeat songs. The first one wasn't upbeat. The first one was a lullaby for adults. And that one got like duetted and stitched and stuff a whole lot because people would do harmony with it. People would put music behind it. And it was something like, hey, it's okay. Everybody feels a little weird someday. It's really like sweet and cute and just kind of makes you feel like you're not alone. Then she also just had a song go viral with her partner that was If I Were a Fish. And it's basically just talking about body image and how, like, if she was a fish, you'd be really excited to have her because she's really big and she's the biggest one in the sea. And it's really about just changing your perspective and enjoying people for who they are, because in a different situation, they'd be exactly what you're looking for. So just change your perspective. You're the problem.
I love that. Most things are about perspective, if we're being honest, right?
Yeah.
All right. Should we get into our main topic?
Yes, before that, I have a story.
Okay.
Because I'm really tired today, and it's because I spent all night in the ER.
Oh my God.
So, and you all can tell me if you think that my ADHD is related to this, because it may have played a role. Yesterday, Jarrett and I went to his cousin's graduation party. I'm finally just getting comfortable around his family. They're very, like, neurotypical acting, at least. And I get a little intimidated in those situations. And they're all stylish and beautiful. And I feel like a big clown when I go there. But I'm feeling more comfortable around his family. Was finally starting to feel good. We were sitting there on the patio in chairs at a table, chatting just for a minute. And we go to get up to, like, get food and stuff. And when I stand up, there's a little wet spot on the seat. And I go, oh my gosh, I sat in ice. And I'm super self-conscious because I got a wet spot on my butt. I'm like, oh my gosh. Okay, so I go and I switch chairs. And I sit down in the chair. I'm like, okay, some of my water's going to absorb into the seat cushion. And Jarrett, you can go do whatever and come back for me. And then, and he's like, no, it should be done. It should be fine by now. You're good. And I stood up again and there was another wet spot. Then I went to a third chair. And I go to stand up and it's a huge wet spot. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm wetting myself.
What?
I am fully losing control of my bladder and I feel nothing. Like usually you would feel something coming out. Nothing. I felt nothing. So I'm in terror because I have a history of back problems. Like I was bedridden in 2020 from a herniated disc, as well as part of last year. And every single phone call that I have with my back doctor ends with, are you having any incontinence? No, not at all. Okay, if you ever have any incontinence, that's an emergency. You need to go to the ER. So now I'm thinking, holy, my spine is broken. Something's going on with my spine. Today I had back day at the gym and did amazing and like made progress. Like, did I overextend myself? Like, what in the heck is going on here? I thought I made so much progress. And now I'm just like losing my bladder out of nowhere. And now I'm in this party full of beautiful people that I'm intimidated by. And I have to leave with a huge wet spot on my butt and a huge wet spot on their chair. So Jarrett, God bless him, goes and gets me his hoodie from his car and puts it around my waist. And we very discreetly shuffle out the door, head straight to the ER. I'm bawling. First of all, when you go to the ER, they make you say out in front of everyone why you're there.
Right.
People have very embarrassing emergencies.
Yeah.
This should not be protocol.
No.
Especially not for people who have social anxiety.
Yeah.
So I'm like bawling. And thankfully, I always keep a pad of paper and a pen in my lunchbox. And I straight up mimed to her. Like, pen and paper, please. She didn't get it. So I open my lunchbox, which is my purse for those of you who don't know. And I get a pad of paper and a pen and I write down sudden incontinence, no history, never been pregnant. Like, I don't have bladder problems.
Yeah.
And then I said lots of neurological issues. So then she's like, I'm so sorry, we'll have someone with you. Go through this whole thing, hours and hours of explaining this to people, bawling my eyes out, people looking at me like I'm crazy. Some people just look at me like, oh yeah, well, she's getting older, you know, and I'm like, trust me, that's not the case.
Yeah.
And then they did a full MRI on me because they wanted to make sure that my spine wasn't, in some sort of emergency state.
Yeah.
And so they did the MRI. Nope, lots of progress. Like, my back looks great on the MRI. And they're like, okay, go home. And I'm just like, I'm happy that there's nothing wrong with my back. But I know that the next time I go to my doctor, they're just going to think I'm crazy. They're going to think I'm some sort of hypochondriac because stuff like this happens to me all the time. Well, we get home and it's like midnight. And Jarrett goes, why don't you just go smell your pants for a minute? I'm like, my pants that I was wearing? It's like, yeah, go smell them. And I was like, they're going to smell like piss. And he goes, just do me a favor and go smell them. And I was like, all right. So I went and I smelled them. They smelled like no one had worn them that day. Like freshly laundered pants. Like nothing at all. And I was like, what? It rained last night and the water sunk into the seat cushions and it dried just enough for the surface to dry so that when I sat down on them,
oh my God,
the water came up into my butt. So I'm tired today and I owe $150 to Kaiser Permanente and a lot of their hours back. Sorry.
Oh my God. I have no words. So your first thought.
My first thought was that it wasn't me, was that it was the seat. I'm like, I sat on ice, clearly.
Yeah.
Because I don't piss myself.
Yeah.
But then it got reinforced. And then it got majorly reinforced a third time.
So you think this could be related to your ADHD in some way?
You know, there were a couple of things that made me think that maybe like just being high anxiety and having all that social anxiety, like immediately made me go to that place immediately of like being horrified in this social situation because I've been humiliated so many times.
Yeah.
On top of like my hypermobility stuff, which is what led to my herniated disc. If anybody else had sat in those chairs, they would have second guessed it more. But because I've been dealing with these spinal problems, and every time I talk to my doctor, it's beware of any incontinence. If Jared had sat in those chairs, he would have known it wasn't him.
Yeah.
Because we were also thinking, he kept saying, it only wet you on the back. It didn't wet you on the front. And I was like, yeah, you kind of have a point. Because I have really tight pants on.
Yeah.
I'm like, you kind of have a point. Like,
when you pee your pants,
it doesn't go straight to your butt crack.
How do I know this? I will not say. But it goes like all over and like down your legs. I haven't peed my pants since kindergarten, but I did pee my pants in kindergarten waiting at my bus stop, and that is how I got another die.
I did hear that was a neurodivergent thing, especially bedwetting. Like I do, okay, so real talk, I do actually wet the bed. Not regularly. It happens like once a year, but because I have like a sleeping disorder where I go into REM sleep too much, I will have very vivid dreams that I'm on the toilet. And I will straight up say to myself, okay, I'm on the toilet. You're not dreaming, right? You better make sure you're not dreaming. Pinch yourself. Nope, we're good. I'm at my mom's house. Everything's definitely not dreaming. Okay, go ahead. Nope, I was dreaming.
Really? Wow. Both of my kids are ADHD and autistic. So, and they both wet the bed. Sorry, kids. They didn't wet but they wore pull-ups until not a very late age, but like later than normal. Yeah. Even my son was to the point where, well, my son is trans. So back then he was still a girl, but to the point where it was like, we went to like see a urologist and got tests done and stuff because I think he was like 10 and he still had to wear pull-ups, and it didn't happen every night, but it was like a thing. And it gets to the point where you're like, okay, like something might be like physiologically wrong, but nothing was structurally wrong or anything. Both my kids just took a really long time for their bodies at night to keep control in that way. I'm not sure why, and it wasn't their fault.
A lot of us have sleeping disorders, and I don't think that they look into that enough. Because I only just realized I had a sleeping disorder this year when I was like falling asleep and like dreaming as I'm falling asleep. And then I realized like, hey, you're supposed to have sleep cycles before the dreaming stage. And then I looked into it and was like, oh my gosh, this is it. But our family too, you know, I don't want to give secrets away, but like there was problems like that of like having the bed thing that sets an alarm off and wakes you up abruptly in the middle of the night. I had to quit dance lessons because, oh God, I was so in love with this musical theater show that I wanted to do and loved it, but couldn't stop peeing myself in practice.
How old were you at that point?
4 or 5.
So past the point where like daytime potty training should have been a thing.
Exactly.
But it's not like there's stigmas around so many things like that where it's like, oh, this should be a thing by now or shouldn't be a thing by now. And it's like, I don't know, everyone's bodies and brains are different, so.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Sorry, that was a big tangent. I felt like I had to address the elephant in the room.
Tangents are us. That could be the second name of this podcast.
Okay, so our main topic today was, I just wanted to address my autism status because there's a lot of like confusion around it, especially with some of the videos that I made early on in TikTok. And I know that the autistic community is very sensitive about feeling invalidated, and I don't want to ever make it seem like I don't want an autistic diagnosis because I'm afraid of it or anything, because I'm absolutely not. I absolutely know and love all people autistic. I have tons in my life, and just depending upon who you talk to, some would consider me autistic and some would not. And I just want to be very clear about why that is. And you can decide for yourself. And if you would like me to call myself autistic, sure, I certainly will. But I try not to. I try to just call myself neurodivergent in general, just because I don't want there to be a lot of confusion, because I do have some things and I don't have others. I also don't ever want to speak for the autistic community, because if I'm not having some significant experiences that they traditionally have, I don't want to speak on their behalf. Okay, so there are sections in the DSM for autism diagnoses, for the criteria. And the first section has, 3 kind of characteristics, but they're all social related, right?
They're all social related. The DSM, for those who don't know, the DSM stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, and it's basically the tool that doctors use to diagnose any sort of mental disorder.
Right. It's the industry standard. Not every doctor follows it to a T. It's just the standard guideline in the industry. It's put together by the American Psychiatric Association.
Yes.
So this is psychiatry, not psychology, because there's the APA psychiatry and there's the APA psychology. This is by psychiatry medical treatment. There's 2 main sections, and the top section has 3 criteria, and they're all pretty much socially based, right? They are deficits in social emotional reciprocity, ranging, for example, from abnormal social approach and failure of normal and back and forth conversation, failure to initiate or respond to social interactions. Then deficits in nonverbal communications, poorly integrated verbal and nonverbal communications and abnormalities, eye contact and body language or deficits, understanding and use of gestures, facial expressions, developing and maintaining relationships, all that kind of stuff. So it really is all related to interpersonal contact and communication, and either deficits in communicating or deficits in understanding communication or participating in communication. Now that stuff I don't have. I have strange behavior, but it's all very intentional and very aware. I feel like that's a big part of autism. And a lot of people have been like, well, maybe it's just your ADHD masking all of your social stuff. And so I've kind of dove into all of the experiences that people have. I asked all of my autistic friends about the experiences they have that qualify for these things. And it'll be stuff like, oh, I'm very aware of how much eye contact I'm making with people. And oh, this is too much. This is too little. Oh, it's appropriate for me to look at them now. And I've never had any sort of awareness of how much eye contact I'm giving to anyone. My mannerisms are very exaggerated and very instinctual. I'm stereotypical Italian in that way, to where if you tie my hands behind my back, I can't talk. And I'm very emotionally based with my communication. So, and that comes out in my whole body. And I'm never aware of what my mannerisms are or anything like that. In fact, it helps me a lot more communicate with myself, because I have a language deficit, and it's extremely difficult for me to take my thoughts and put them into words. The language processing is a really big deficit for me. So I rely heavily on facial expressions and mannerisms and stuff, but that stuff feels so instinctual. I've never had any sort of awareness of studying it or doing things intentionally. Are there any other of those kinds of things that were kind of tipped you off?
Yeah. So, I obviously have an autism diagnosis, so I checked enough of those boxes to get me to that place. But for my social stuff, I don't really have a hard time reading body language or facial cues. That stuff actually helps me a lot in interpreting what someone is trying to say, or that's why Zoom is really hard for me. I hate that everything's going on Zoom, because I just recently had a job interview over Zoom, and I hate it because I'm I can't see what this person's doing with their body, and the nuance of it's different than sitting in front of someone. I can't catch as much of a vibe of it's just way harder for me to communicate with someone like that, because I do use those things as big cues. Because sometimes for me, the words that people are saying don't really convey what they're meaning as much.
I do have that problem, but to me, that's a language processing problem. And so if I'm just connecting with someone and I'm seeing what they're like, I could have a full communication with you with no words and we're just like doing that thing, but it's all instinctual, you know, it's not like I'm going to put my hand here because this signals that I'm happy, you know?
Right. The building and maintaining of relationships is nearly impossible to me. I don't really know what's hard about it specifically. I feel like if I knew what was hard about it or what was missing, I might be able to fix it, but it's just a thing that I don't understand how to do. So I'm like, I don't even know the questions to ask of like,
you don't know what you don't know.
I don't know what I don't know about those sorts of things. So it's like maintaining any sort of like relationships or friendships is really, really hard for me.
One thing that I've heard from some of my autistic friends is learning social cues from TV. I remember my friend Kyle Weiss. You should follow him on social media. He's wonderful and I absolutely adore him. He explained to me how he felt betrayed by TV because he had learned how people interacted with each other from TV and he used that in real life and realized, oh, it's not the same. And he felt like they had set him up for failure.
Gotcha. Yeah, that is a very common autistic thing. And I feel like, yeah, I relate to that in certain ways. I feel like, not so much now, but back when I was still trying really hard to like fit in and be normal and have a friend group and like all of these things that are like near impossible. I feel like I was kind of a social chameleon. Like I would become whoever I was around just because I'm like, okay, this is how I'm supposed to act. Like I had no gauge of who I actually was. And I'm like, I need to figure out how to act. And I guess I do that by watching the people around me. But then it makes people perceive you, I think, as like really inauthentic. Because I got bullied for this really bad, like in the middle school and like early high school years. Girls would be like, oh my God. I remember there was this one girl named Jenny. And they were like, oh my God, you're so obsessed with Jenny. Like, are you in love with her? Why do you try and act just like her? I'd be like, I do. I am. Like, I'm like, oh no, like they're catching on.
Oh, I see. That's another thing that kind of tips me off that like maybe I'm not, because there is no, for me, there's no, they're going to find me out, because everything I do feels very genuine. But I do hear that a lot from people who I relate to who are diagnosed autistic and identify with it. And this is what's so difficult about it is ADHD and autism look so alike. And there's some ways where they cancel each other out. But then there's other things where like they'll manifest the same, but it's because of a different purpose. So like you copying people and mimicking them was you learning how to try to connect with them, right? For me, it was very instinctual. And I automatically just take on the personality of the person I'm talking to just because I'm like just in the flow of like whatever energy is given to me, I'm taking it and using it. So there's no actual cognitive separation of like, I need to do this in order to fit in. But it looks the same, right? We're both like taking on the accent of the person who's talking to us. Yes. One of my ex-boyfriends, it was so cute because every time he would get in front of someone who had a different dialect, he would totally take it on. And it looked like it did look disingenuous. It almost looked like he was mocking them. But I thought it was so cute because I knew that he was just like trying to connect with them and trying to like feel their vibe, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, that kind of stuff was really hard for me. No, I was a person growing up who just like I just wanted to fit in. Like I just wanted friends. I just wanted people to like me. Like I said, once I started getting older and I was like, none of this is working. You start figuring out like none of this is ever working, and like you get tired of doing that all the time, and you just start being yourself and being like, okay, I'm just gonna, finally just like
be myself and fuck who doesn't like it.
And it's like you get to a point where you don't really know how to be yourself at first. You're like, I've always been like trying to be everybody else.
You know what's funny is that actually is sometimes listed as like a borderline personality trait. Mm-hmm. And I have a psychologist friend who has a theory that borderline personality is really just ADHD and autism with childhood neglect. It's basically the result of someone with ADHD or autism having serious trauma.
Oh,
yeah. So
interesting.
Huh?
That is a very
common
misdiagnosis for women in particular who are autistic to get first a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. I do know that for sure.
Yeah. I wanted to address, so I did this video called Hollywood Syndrome. And so that experience I talked about with Kyle, about how television had betrayed him. Well, my experience was that I'm almost on kind of like the bipolar end of ADHD, to where like I go into these big fantasies of like, it's almost like delusions of grandeur, but I do still have a base in reality. Like I know that these things aren't happening and I'm not like winning an Oscar, but I'll just go into these huge fantasies of like what I think is going to happen, and all these social situations where I walk in and I'm the queen and I just look amazing. Like I go to prom and everybody just stops and stares at me, and it's very like Hollywood-esque, right? Mm-hmm. But it's just me trying to entertain myself with dopamine, because like being perfect Disney, like everything's beautiful and perfect, is so dopamine-y. Like, it's really just like, I'm just entertaining myself and painting these fantasies for myself. Yeah. The problem is that then I try to act them out. I try to be like, yeah, this is going to be me at prom. I'm going to do it. And I get like motivated by them, and I let it influence my actions. Mm-hmm. And then it falls flat because in reality, I don't have the money to have a stylist and have my makeup done perfectly, you know? Oh my gosh. So funny. So these things fall flat, and I end up in these really awkward situations and feeling like a big dork. Because I had too high of expectations for myself, and I shot too high. Yeah. And when I'm describing that experience, if I'm not careful, that does sound like I learned all these things from TV and then I tried to act them out and it went flat. But It's a different experience, but manifesting the same.
The same. Yeah, very true. Very true. Different sides of the same coin, I guess.
Right. Yeah. That's why it makes this so difficult. And let's keep in mind that the DSM is just people noticing commonalities. Mm-hmm. This really is all correlation. It's not causation. And that just brings me to the next parts of this diagnosis, because they group together different experiences just because they are commonly coming together. Mm-hmm. But I know many people, like most people, aren't the same in which ones they show. Same with ADHD. Like, you could show some autistic traits and other ADHD traits, and I could show like the complete opposite ADHD traits and the other autistic traits. You know, we need to start getting very granular about what each experience is and what it's coming from and why it's happening. And then we can actually go, okay, which ones of these are actually connected? Which ones of these are part of the same mechanism, rather than what commonly is seen together? Mm-hmm. Because this other stuff, the next part, has a lot of rigid thinking in it. And I'm a very rigid thinker. I am very pragmatic. I like reason. I like logic. I don't like traditional norms. I think they're dumb. We should always just be doing what's the most logical. And if you try to get me to do what's not the most logical, I'm gonna keep challenging you and asking you why. And that's like, you know, inflexible adherence to routines and highly restricted fixated interests. And so this sounds like hyperfocus, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Highly restricted fixated interests that are abnormal in intensity or focus. That's hyperfocus. Now, they say that the difference between hyperfocus and special interest is that hyperfocus has an end time. Like, it has a timeline on it where you suck out all the dopamine and you're done. Like when you eat pasta for 40 days straight and then you can't look at pasta again for 2 years. But a special interest carries on throughout your whole life. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Would you agree?
Pretty much. Or long term, very long term.
Yeah.
It's not like a quick fixation that you...
Yeah. Although I will say, like, I've loved Pink as long as I've known her, that's been what, 20 years? Mm-hmm. More than 20 years? So
yeah.
Is that special interest?
And I think special interest, like, the more I talk to autistic people, it kind of presents differently for different people too. I don't think there's any standard across the board. There are some people that I know that are autistic that don't have an ADHD diagnosis, but still get like these mini special interests where you deep dive into something, you want to learn everything you can about it. And then once you learn everything you can about it, then you're just like, cool, I know all that stuff about that thing now. And you still like it, but then like that part of it is set aside. So I don't know if that means they have undiagnosed ADHD or if it just means that special interests can be
very likely
more fleeting. Or
70%. One of the numbers I've seen is 70% of autistic people have ADHD as well. Mm-hmm. So it's very common.
I believe it.
And this is what I'm saying is like, that's because human beings have put together these disorders. Mm-hmm. That these disorders are just groups of symptoms that people have grouped together and put a name on. So it doesn't mean that it's exact science at all by any means. So really take this stuff with a grain of salt. I like to talk about individual experiences as they exist, just because that's what makes sense to me. And that's what actually brings me closure and gives me tools to cope with them. And some of this stuff, like a lot of this stuff looks like OCD to me, and I know that everyone I've ever known with the OCD was also autistic. There's a lot of like obsession, Yeah, there's a lot of like obsession and fixation. I have some OCD traits too. I had a problem in my teenage years where I was like putting toilet paper on my own toilet seat and only walking on the edges of the carpets. And so I know I have those tendencies, and I have a lot of process addictions or behavioral addictions, and they're all sensory based. It's smelling stuff, it's feeling stuff, it's it's all sensory, and that just seems to me like an obsession, hyperfixation, OCD. OCD and autism just really feel very close together.
All of these things seem very like.
Yeah. Then there's also the sensory processing. So that's in here too. Now, I don't know how many of you ADHDers out there without an autism diagnosis have sensory problems. And if you know the neuroscience behind sensory issues, it's really just a dysregulation of attention, because you're hearing the same sounds that someone else is. It's just that your attention is going to it and it's really pissing you off. Like you're putting too much attention on that one sensor, on that one stimuli. Why is that grouped in with autism? I don't know. I mean, the emotional dysregulation, like if that one sound that is distracting you really makes you upset, but it seems like anybody would be very upset from a sound that their attention is fixated on abnormally.
Yeah.
So it's a mess. So DSM is a mess.
I think part of the problem with categorizing and separating these things is like, to me personally, and I'm not a psychologist or a doctor of any sort, but just in knowing what I know, I personally feel like autism and ADHD are the same thing. I feel like they just present differently in different people, and that's why there is such a huge overlap. Like, so many of us have both, but maybe not so many of us have both. Maybe it's just all of the same thing. Like how there used to be Asperger's disorder and autism. And eventually they were like, oh, these are all just autism spectrum disorder. Like, I feel like eventually maybe we'll get to the point where it's like, oh, this is all pretty much the same shit going on in everyone's brain. It's just everyone's different.
Yeah,
like,
people use different coping mechanisms to deal with it, and it turned into this. Or, they also have this gene that made it look like this instead. So,
and I think when you are using a diagnostic tool where both of these things, let's be honest, the majority of the studies have been done on children and on a very specific segment of the population, as in like white young males for both ADHD and autism, then you're getting this set of observational traits. Yeah. Where it's like, oh, here's what we see in this population of young white boys. Here's what we see in this group of young. So this is ADHD, this is autism. Here's what this one looks like. Here's what this one looks like. Yeah, there's overlap, but it's two different things. And it's like, we need to look more at what these things, how these things present as people grow into adults and have life experiences and learn coping skills and become more self-aware. Why don't we study adults? Why don't we study how this stuff presents when people get older? Because really, even on the DSM, it says right here, to meet diagnostic criteria, diagnostic? I'm in the medical field.
I was with you. I was riding the train.
To meet diagnostic criteria for ASD, according to DSM-5, a child must have persistent deficits in each of these three areas. So they're already just saying right here in the DSM, they're just describing this to a child. This is for kids.
And why are we revolving all of this research around kids when their brains aren't even fully formed yet?
Yeah.
Like maybe they're just growing slowly in that area of their brain.
Yeah. Some of these things aren't as outwardly obvious in some of us as they are in others. If you're looking at one autistic child and another autistic child, like of course, since I was missed for so long, my things were very subtle, as opposed to maybe another child who had a very obvious special interest or hyperfixation or had very obvious social struggles. Mine was more just like, oh, she's a little bit introverted and weird and whatever. So it's like,
yeah, we all have different upbringings too. Like, if you are in a family that's just like, yeah, everybody be free to be who they are. We love your weird. You're going to have very different symptoms than somebody who's like, that's not normal. You shouldn't do that. Girls play with Barbies and boys play with G.I. Joes, So you're going to have, your things are going to manifest very differently based on your influences. So it's just use discretion, friends and doctors.
And one more thing before we wrap up on this topic. I just don't like So the ick factor with all of these like negative words, I get it. It's already like autism spectrum disorder. It's in the DSM, which is the diagnostic manual for, what's it called? Mental disorders. So right there, it's like, this is a disorder.
Or something, this is this like, and this and this wrong with you.
This is something wrong with you. And then this is like deficits in this, deficits in that, deficits in this. Failure of normal back and forth conversations, poorly integrated verbal communication. The word normal is used in here a lot. Abnormal, not normal, outside of normal. And it's like...
Deficits, not enough. You're not enough. You're not enough.
Highly restricted, fixated interests that are abnormal in intensity or focus. I want to know who decided what was normal in regard to intensity or focus of interest.
Yeah.
Who did it? Tell me his name. So it was a guy. You know it was a white guy. It was a cis white man. Sorry. You're not all bad, but you know that's who was doing that.
Yeah.
Making a list of... Is there a list of what's normal? And then we can look at it and be like, oh, okay, yeah, I did read that article for 2 hours when a normal person would have read it for 15 minutes.
Right.
I don't know, like, what's the gauge?
Right. And so this was actually why I decided that I wanted to become a neuropsychologist, because I want to start getting very specific about all these experiences, and I want psychology to speak with neuroscience. I want both of them to be speaking the same language, and I want to get very granular about what is happening in the brain with who and why. Because this just, it seems ridiculous how they're all categorized and separated, and Tourette's is different, and like tic disorders, when like, hey, I know tons of people with ADHD with tic disorders, and guess what? When my meds are too high, when I'm having a nerve panic at night, I'll get tics. But it's like, they're just random little, like things that you would never notice that were tics, and so you would never diagnose me as a tic disorder or Tourette's, because it's part of my ADHD, like, anyway.
We can get to our segments now.
Sure.
Yeah.
Stimulation Regulation Station, all aboard.
This is where we are each going to list
preferences that we have when we are either overstimulated or understimulated. So my first understimulated is, okay, so I kind of stole this, but it's Nerds Clusters. You candy faces out there, you fellow candy faces, I know who you are. We all love the Nerds Clusters because of the yummy, the difference in textures. Like you got the crunchy with the gummy inside.
Okay, and I didn't know what a Nerds Cluster was.
Oh, yeah, okay, so you know the Nerds rope?
Mm-hmm.
They basically just cut it up into sections.
Okay.
And the gummy part in the middle is a little bit bigger, so it's an actual gummy in the middle.
I'm not a candy face, so you're going to have to educate me on candies.
Yeah, so my candy people know the Nerds Cluster. It came out a couple years ago. But it's also got like the sour, tangy element of the Nerds.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a while ago, I went to a Fresno event, and they had one of those booths. And here in Fresno, they put tahini on everything. Chamoy and tahini on everything. Chili lime. They got chili lime mangoes everywhere. They put it on candy, blah, blah. I put those on Nerds Clusters. Woo! Oh my goodness.
That is a combo I would have never thought of.
It is a dopamine bomb. It will blow your mind. So if you're having like that super intense craving where you just can't eat anything hard enough, I have a video that I described werewolfing. If you're werewolfing, Nerds Clusters with chamoy or tahini.
That's where it's at.
Yeah.
So that's when you're understimulated. That's a good, like, stimulating food for you.
Yes. Yeah. It curbs that craving.
That's an interesting combo. Okay. I'll do mine for when I'm understimulated. I like to wander around in stores. So I know we talked last episode about how I don't like the grocery store. I don't like to wander in the grocery store. But there are certain stores that I really like to wander around in. Home Goods is one of them. I'm not super into makeup, but for some reason I really like Ulta. Really love Target when it's not busy, though. You have to go on like a Wednesday morning or something, and I will wander Target. I don't even have to buy anything. At the whole store. Oh. The whole store. I will just go all around. I stay away from the toys and the electronics section in the back just because
it gets a little busy.
I didn't really realize that this was a thing that I enjoyed doing so much until we were on lockdown and we could not do it. To me, it's a stimulation thing where I can like get out and like be out in the world and things are happening and I'm seeing new things and I'm like, ooh, this is cool, whatever. Like I said, I don't even have to buy anything. It's just the like picking stuff up and looking at it and, you know.
I'm impressed that you don't buy everything. Because that's, when I go into Target, it's the problem on my checkbook.
Right. It's the impulse buy of the ADHD. So yeah, I'm very weird about
the spending problem.
That kind of stuff. I'm like opposite. I'm a miser. But when we couldn't go out, I was like, it was really, really hard for me to not be able to go like wander around stores, because also to me, that feels like a social activity. Even though I'm by myself, like I'm out in the world and I'm seeing people. I'm passing by that lady with her cart, and we're like, what's up? And like you check out with the checker person, and if you're at Trader Joe's, you might become friends with the checker.
You'll have to think about what you're going to do after that.
Yeah. But like to me, that feels very social, which might be like weird to someone who isn't autistic, but like for me, I'm like, that was a big social part of my world, and it got taken away, and that's part of the things that made me crazy, where I'm like, go out and wander the stores and like see people and pick things up and think about how I would use them, but probably not buy them.
I think I probably have the same experience with farmers markets.
Yeah, I like farmers markets too.
It's like gently social.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. As long as people aren't trying to like hardcore salesman me. I don't like booths like that where you walk up and they're like, hi, and you're like, oh no, I already don't like it. Like, just let me browse. If I have questions, I'll ask. And then they're like, have you ever bought 5 pounds of strawberries before? And I'm like, no, I just wanted to look at the berries because they're pretty and they're shiny and they're red.
This is the sweetest peach that you've ever tasted.
Oh, when they try and feed you pieces of fruit, I have a really bad like germ phobia. So if someone else, I'm like, did you wash that? When was the last time you washed your hands? Is this a clean fork? Like, I don't know any of those variables. So I'm like, thank you. They're like, just try. It's like my Italian grandmother, like, just try one bite. Just, you'll really like it. And I'm like,
I promise you I'm not going to know the difference.
Fruit is a fruit. Do you have tahini? Okay, your other one.
I have a full collection of onesies. I was doing this way back in 2005, I think. I found my first onesie I think it was like Sears on Black Friday or something. It was this bizarre thing where I was like, this is an adult-sized onesie? What?
Yeah.
And I started wearing them. People would make fun of me. I didn't care. But then they became a thing, and now other people have onesies, and I love it. But it's just so soothing, like when you've had the worst day ever, when your clothes don't fit, when you have one of those sensory overload fits because like your clothes are assaulting you, and everybody's too loud and everybody is too critical. I love to just put my onesie on and I just like melt away into comfort.
That's nice.
And they can still like have a little stimulation. Like I have a onesie that's pink and has unicorns, and then I have another one that's like bright blue and has stars, and then I have another one that's just gray. I just need no stimuli at all.
A little neutrality. Yeah. I can get down with that. A onesie's good. The only thing I hate about those is when you have to pee, you have to get like totally naked. You get really cold. I'm like, burr.
I have a couple with a butt flap, but something about peeing with your clothes on doesn't feel right. You know what it is? It reminds me too much of those dreams.
It's like trauma from the pee dreams. Yeah, I get that. I hate being cold, and that segues into what mine is for when I'm overstimulated is baths.
Ooh.
I love baths so much, and it's unfortunate because we live in California and it gets really hot here in the summer, so like there's a very specific time of year when I can take baths. Like I'm not taking a hot bath in the summer, and if I take a bath it has to be hot. Like I'm sweating, I'm like red by the time I get out. Like it's a hot bath and I love it. There's just something about being warm that's like so soothing to me, and I find that in the summer, just even going outside for a few minutes when it's like 105 degrees out, I can go outside in the shade and just sit there for like 5 minutes and be like,
dude, I can do it in the sun, in Fresno sun, in 110 degrees. I will let my skin just singe.
I do like laying in the sun for a minute. Not when it's 105. When it's like 80s, I'll go out and I'll be like, yes. I've been doing that a lot lately in my backyard because we just moved into a house with like a nice backyard, and I got like a sun chair, and I'm like, I'm gonna go out and sit in my hopefully my neighbors aren't peeking through the fence because my bikini that I wear out there is very small. Something I would not necessarily wear in public, but anyway.
Yeah. Well, I would bet that there's also an element of so a lot of us are hypermobile. That's another genetic tie to neurodivergence is hypermobility, which can really take a toll on your joints and muscles. And so I would bet that the bath also really feels good on those stressed out muscles and joints.
It does. And also being cold is very overstimulating to me. I just can't. I could never live somewhere where it was cold all the time.
Same.
When I get too cold, I start to feel extremely overwhelmed and stressed out.
Totally.
So maybe the bath is an extra special remedy for that particular kind of overstimulation, but really any type of overstimulation, I'm like, bath or warmth, heat in general, I can just be like, okay, it's nice and warm and it's soothing and it's great.
I'm the exact same way with the cold, and in fact, I don't tolerate it I'm very it's cold in here and I need a sweatshirt now. I need to go somewhere where it's warm.
I will get pissed off.
Yeah.
I will get really pissed off.
Yeah, I get all mama bear about it. But I also have this weird panicky thing where if hot air is being blown in my face, I feel like I can't breathe and I go into a full panic.
Okay.
So it's tough because I have to navigate, I need everything to be warm except right here.
I don't like
Which is why the onesie helps.
Yeah.
Right?
The onesie, yeah, that's a good, you can put it
on and you...
just leave a little. Yeah. Next, our next segment is... okay, this is where we're going to talk about TV or movie characters that we relate to heavily, and maybe say a little bit about why. So,
my first one is Forgetful Jones. It's a love-hate with Forgetful Jones because as I was a kid, my parents always called me Forgetful Jones. If you're not familiar, it's a character on Sesame Street. He's a little cowboy, and he forgets everything. And everybody, it's funny, we all laugh about how, of course, he forgot the thing because he's Forgetful Jones. And so my parents would call me that all the time. And they did it in a way that wasn't super mean. So I kind of laughed about it. But now looking back, I'm a little resentful because I'm like, red flags, anyone?
yeah.
Maybe we should have looked into that and taken me to a doctor.
Yeah. I mean, it was, I assume, the 80s or 90s. And
right.
People weren't looking into things back then. I know
right.
that for sure. Forgetful Jones. I don't really know that character. And I used to watch Sesame Street as a kid, but...
It wasn't a big character. I think you wouldn't know it unless it resonated with you.
Okay, gotcha. All right. I'm not forgetful, so it probably wouldn't... I mean, not to a huge extent.
And you know what? That's another part of the DSM that I have a problem with, is that I am extremely absent-minded. Extremely. I don't know anybody else who's as flighty as me and leaves their shit everywhere and leaves the sprinklers on and forgets to take things out of the freezer. I'm the worst. And I know people who have fully diagnosed ADHD that don't have that experience. It's just two totally different manifestations. And I don't think that they're the same thing. They're from different types of neurotransmitters. So, anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry for my neuroscience soapbox.
Little... Yeah, we enjoy sprinkling a tangent here or there. I mean, it's related to what we were talking about. So, okay. My first one, the first one that always pops into my mind when I'm talking about this with anyone is Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory. He's a little bit of a controversial character. Some autistic people are very offended by the Sheldon character.
I think because he's so two-dimensional.
He is very stereotypical, and he is very, I think the way he presents is unsavory because a lot of people think they present him like he's an asshole, that he's rude, he's a jerk, whatever. To me, it's really funny because when I used to watch The Big Bang Theory before I knew I was autistic, and I related hard to Sheldon. I loved that show. Some of the parts of his character I don't relate to, but so much of it I do. Just the way he thinks about things is very similar to the way I think about things. My internal monologue a lot, the germ things, the wanting to sit in the same spot all the time, just the little idiosyncrasies about Sheldon. There's so many that I relate to so heavily. And then I found out that I was autistic, and I was like, oh my God, I think Sheldon is supposed to be autistic. And then I found out that Bill Prady, one of the creators of Big Bang Theory, is autistic. And the Sheldon character is heavily based on him personally. He wrote the Sheldon character in his the bird's creeping. He's about to come back up on me. I listened to a podcast episode with him on it, and I was like, oh my gosh, he's autistic. He based the Sheldon character on himself. So Sheldon is definitely supposed to be autistic, for those people that are like, they never say in the show that he is. And I'm like, come on.
Yeah.
So yeah, Sheldon is a big one for me. I'm actually obsessed with Big Bang Theory.
It's so funny that you say that because I literally a couple weeks ago, I was with a friend who is very clearly autistic. He's one of the most autistic people I know, whether he's diagnosed or not. He definitely shows all of the traits. He always refers to himself as the Sheldon in the group. And I'm like, should that be your first clue that
yeah.
Maybe they can have something in common here?
Yeah, I think anyone out there, if you relate heavily to Sheldon,
maybe look into it.
Maybe, yeah, just think about it. Okay, what was your second one?
My second one was Pippi Longstocking.
Oh.
Because she's so ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And
in a good way.
I didn't like the words weird and ridiculous growing up, really even into my 20s. But ridiculous has become my favorite compliment. And I love the parts of me that are Pippi Longstocking. In fact, I did a little web series. I wrote a little web series of like Pippi Longstocking in her 30s and like her reuniting with her friend Annika and like just still being her and wacky and like walking on ceilings and causing chaos and stuff and like food fights and stuff. And just because it was so, it was so indulgent for me to just pretend that I could just go and just do these ridiculous things as an adult, you know? Yeah. So yeah, that's who I relate to.
Pippi Longstocking, I like that one. I loved those books growing up. Oh my gosh.
I don't think I read the books. I just saw the movies.
Oh, I didn't know there was movies.
Yeah. Oh. So she was always like, I don't know how many people are familiar with Pippi Longstocking. I feel like it's a very specific generation thing.
It's definitely a big thing in the 80s.
Yeah, and it's this like wacky kind of orphan girl. She's not a total orphan, but her dad is like a pirate on a pirate ship, and she like has her friend Annika, who's like more reserved, but she gets Annika to like come out of her shell and like do all these crazy things with her.
Yeah.
And I've always liked that, like, because I'm always the person at karaoke that like is wild and crazy and loves everyone, and then there's always the girl in the corner that's like, oh god, what is she doing? And my goal is always to get her on my team and get her dancing with me. Yeah. And so I just love that dynamic of like pulling people out of their
little shell.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good one. I like that one. Okay, my second one is Jess from the show New Girl. She has the best intentions, but bless her, she's always getting stuff so wrong. And I just relate to that so hard, where it's like, I'm doing my best, but things always just don't seem to work out the way I thought they would or the way I wanted them to. And just the way that she kind of is just sort of like weird, but also like a little bit tries to fit in, but also just like is sort of like marches to the beat of her own drum. I relate to Jess heavily. Whenever I watch that show, I'm like,
yeah,
the same.
Yeah, I love that, and I also love that she's still like endearing. Like it's not held against her. Everybody just goes, "Oh, Jess, you're so cute," you know. Yeah. It's basically like she's cute and endearing because of all those qualities.
Yeah, and I always feel like if Sheldon and Jess had a baby, it would be me. That's my parents. I'm
wow,
like an amalgamation of those two characters.
That's a pretty great description.
Yeah.
It's funny.
So,
cool.
That's all for
today, folks.
Well, that just reminded me of the Looney Tunes when it was Porky Pig. He didn't go, blah, 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 blah. That's all, folks. That's also a very 80s reference. People are like, what are cartoons?
Do people still watch Looney Tunes? I'll tell you that I hate Looney Tunes. They are the reason that I hate classical music. Nothing bored me like Looney Tunes when I was a kid.
Really? I loved Looney Tunes when I was a kid.
I wonder if it's the lack of color. Because they weren't very colorful. And I loved all like the Rainbow Bright fairies and like all those super rainbowy like wuzzles.
My Little
Pony popples. Mm-hmm. You know, I liked all that stuff. So yeah, that could have been it. Maybe it was also that they were kind of like mean-spirited. Everybody like trying to chase each other and like hurt each other, and I was like, this is not very nice.
That's true. Yeah, that is very true, and I liked it for some reason. So what does that say about me? Yeah. Okay.
All right. See you next time, folks.
Keep it weird.
Stay weird.
Love you.
We only like you if you're weird.
All right.